The air in Ethelgard's was a carefully curated symphony of quietude. It smelled of old money, beeswax, and the faint, floral notes of $100 bottle of perfume wafting from a nearby table. Crystal glasses, so thin they seemed to hum with a fragile tension, stood like sentinels on starched white linen. Silverware, heavy and ornate, gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting, each fork and spoon a testament to a level of opulence most people only ever saw in films. This was not merely a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for the city's elite, a place where deals were sealed with a handshake and reputations were solidified over plates of meticulously arranged food. Into this hushed world, Amara moved with a practiced and deliberate grace. Her black uniform was simple, functional, and immaculate. She was, to the patrons of Ethelgard's, a part of the elegant machinery that made their evenings seamless. She was a pair of hands that refilled a water glass without being asked, a quiet presence that cleared a plate without interrupting a conversation. To most, she was functionally invisible, a detail as unremarkable as the pattern on the damask wallpaper. Amara was aware of this invisibility. She had, in fact, come to prefer it. It allowed her to observe, to listen, and to do her job without the burden of engagement. But tonight, that invisibility would be shattered. The source of the disruption sat at table 7, a prime spot with a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he was the antithesis of the restaurant's quiet dignity. While the other men in the room wore tailored suits in muted charcoals and navies, Sterling was clad in a shimmering sharkskin suit that seemed to catch the light and throw it back with obnoxious pride. His voice was a gravelly boom that sliced through the gentle murmur of the dining room, drawing irritated glances that he either didn't notice or didn't care about. He was flanked by 2 sycophants who laughed too loudly at his jokes, and a young man, his son, who stared at his own untouched bread plate with an expression of profound and weary embarrassment. Amara had served men like Mr. Sterling before. They were a specific breed of wealthy, loud, entitled, and convinced that their net worth granted them dominion over every human being they encountered. They saw service staff not as people, but as obstacles or tools. From the moment he sat down, Sterling had been difficult. He had snapped his fingers to get her attention, a gesture that made Amara's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He had sent back a wine list, declaring it provincial without even reading it. He had complained that his water was not cold enough, though condensation beaded on the outside of the glass. Each complaint was a small assertion of power, a test of the boundaries. Amara met each one with the same placid, professional calm. She brought a new wine list. She returned with a fresh glass filled with ice and water. Her face was a mask of polite neutrality. This, she knew, was what infuriated men like him the most. Her refusal to be flustered. Her unshakable dignity. It was a quiet defiance he couldn't quite put his finger on, and so it festered within him, growing into a grotesque need to force a reaction, to break her composure and prove she was as small as he believed her to be. The moment came when she approached the table to inquire about their appetizers. "Is everything to your liking, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Sterling leaned back, a sneer twisting his lips. He looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance designed to diminish and objectify. He saw a black woman in a waitress uniform, and in his mind, the calculation was simple, insignificant. "You know," he began, his voice carrying across the now quieter dining room, "for a place this expensive, I expect a certain continental flair." His friends chuckled, sensing the beginning of a performance. Sterling's son sank lower in his chair, his cheeks burning with shame. Amara simply waited, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. "I'll tell you what," Sterling boomed, a malicious glint in his eye. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick money clip, peeling off a startling number of $100 bills. He fanned them out on the table. "I'll give you $1,000 if you serve me in French." The challenge, cruel and loud, hung in the air like a foul odor. It was a proclamation of his prejudice, a public announcement of his assumption that she, a black waitress, could not possibly possess such a skill. It was a trap designed for her humiliation. The dining room fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Every eye in the room turned toward table 7, toward the sneering millionaire and the silent waitress. The audience was a mixture of reactions. Some patrons looked away, their faces tight with secondhand embarrassment, yet they did nothing. Others watched with a detached, clinical curiosity, as if observing a nature documentary. Sterling's two companions leaned forward, their faces alight with cruel anticipation. They were hyenas, waiting for the lion to make his kill. In that moment, Amara felt the profound weight of her isolation. Not a single person moved to defend her. Not one voice spoke up against the vulgarity of the display. She was utterly, completely alone on this stage he had built for her. But were Sterling and his cronies expected to see fear or anger or shame? They saw nothing. Amara's expression did not change. She did not look at the money. She did not look at the leering faces of his friends. She looked directly into Mr. Sterling's eyes. Her gaze was not defiant. It was not hateful. It was something far more unnerving. It was analytical. It was the calm, steady gaze of a superior assessing an inferior. This unnerving calm was a wrench in Sterling's plan. He had expected her to stammer, to blush, to apologize and scurry away, confirming his worldview. Her stillness felt like a judgment. It infuriated him. "What's the matter?" he taunted, his voice even louder now, trying to regain control of the situation. "Cat got your tongue? Or is it just that you can't manage more than we in Merci?" He pushed the stack of bills across the table. $1,000. Cash. Right here, right now. All you have to do is take my entire table's order. Our appetizers, our mains, a wine recommendation for the table, and serve it all. Every interaction. In perfect French. He leaned back, triumphant, certain he had cornered her. This was the gauntlet. A public spectacle from which there was no graceful escape. Amara let the silence stretch for a few heartbeats more. She allowed every person in that room to absorb the full measure of his arrogance. Then her eyes finally flickered down to the $1,000, then back up to his face. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. "I accept," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Sterling blinked, momentarily taken aback. This was not the script he had written. Before he could recover, Amara continued, her voice still calm, but now imbued with a new, steely authority. "However, I have my own terms." Now the audience leaned in, their curiosity piqued. This was no longer a simple humiliation. It was a negotiation. "Your $1,000 is an insult," she stated, not with anger, but with the simple finality of fact. "To me, and to the profession of service. It suggests my dignity is for sale." She paused. "If I fulfill your conditions to your complete satisfaction, taking the full order, providing a detailed wine pairing, and conducting all service for your table for the remainder of the evening exclusively and flawlessly in French, you will not pay me $1,000. Her eyes bored into his. "You will instead make a donation of $10,000 to the Ethelgard Employee Support Fund, which assists staff members with medical bills and family emergencies." A gasp rippled through the room. "Furthermore," she added, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them all in, "you will stand up in front of this entire room, and you will offer a sincere, public apology. Not just to me, but to the entire staff of this restaurant for your disrespectful behavior." The stakes had been raised. The trap had been reversed. Sterling was caught. To back down now, after his boisterous challenge, would be an admission of cowardice. It would be a laughingstock. He looked at her, searching for a sign of bluffing, a hint of fear. He found none. He saw only an unnerving, absolute confidence. Trapped by his own ego, he could only sneer. "Fine. 10,000. An apology. Whatever. You won't get past the first sentence." "We have an agreement, then," Amara said. It was not a question. She gave a slight, formal bow. "I shall return momentarily to begin." As she turned and walked away from the table, her back straight, her steps measured, a profound shift occurred in the room. The air was no longer thick with discomfort, but electric with anticipation. Amara was no longer a victim. She was a contender, and everyone in that room, including the pale-faced Mr. Sterling, knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. She walked not to the kitchens, but to a small staff alcove near the back. She needed a moment, not to gather her courage, that was already in place, but to center herself, to push aside the quiet fury and access the part of her she had kept dormant for so long. As she stood in the quiet of the alcove, the noise of the dining room a distant hum, the past rose up to meet her. It was not a painful memory, but a powerful one. She saw herself, 10 years younger, standing on the shores of Lake Geneva, the crisp Swiss air filling her lungs. She remembered the imposing, historic building of the École Hôtelière de Lausanne, the most prestigious hospitality school on the planet, a place where the children of diplomats and hoteliers came to be forged into the future leaders of the industry. She had been there on a full scholarship, a testament to her ferocious intellect and unwavering ambition. Her family hadn't had money, but they had given her something far more valuable, a belief in the inherent dignity of excellence. Her mind drifted to Monsieur Du Bois, her mentor in the program. Not a professor, but the former maitre d' of a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris, a living legend in the world of haute cuisine service. He was a man who believed service was not a job, but an art form, a ballet of precision, psychology, and grace. To serve, he had told her, his voice a gravelly whisper, is not to be subservient. It is to be in control. You control the guest's experience. You are the conductor of their evening. They are playing in your orchestra. He had been the one to perfect her French, to drill her relentlessly until the Parisian accent was not an affectation, but a part of her. He taught her the labyrinthine complexities of enology, the subtle language of wine, how the soil, the sun, and the history of a place could be tasted in a single drop. He taught her the classic French service, a ritual as precise and demanding as any martial art. The memories were vivid, the weight of a silver tray, the exact angle at which to pour wine, the silent cues to communicate with the kitchen, the psychological dance of anticipating a guest's needs before they were even aware of them. She remembered graduating at the top of her class, Monsieur Du Bois placing a hand on her shoulder. Amara, he had said, his eyes filled with a rare, paternal pride, you are not a waitress. You are a guardian of civilization. From Lausanne, she had gone to Paris. With a partner from school, she had opened Lucille Argent, a small, ambitious restaurant in the Marais district. Within 3 years, it had earned its first Michelin star. Amara was not just the co-owner. She was the soul of the front of house. Her name was whispered with reverence among the city's gourmands. She was Amara Du Bois, a virtuoso of hospitality. She had lived that life, breathed that air. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Her mother, back home in America, had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive illness. The prognosis was uncertain, and the cost of treatment was astronomical. There was no choice to be made. Family was the foundation upon which her ambition had been built. Amara sold her half of Lucille Argent overnight. She liquidated her assets, packed a single suitcase, and flew home. She moved back into her childhood bedroom and became her mother's primary caregiver. The money from the sale, which had seemed like a fortune, dwindled with terrifying speed against the onslaught of medical bills. She needed a job, one with flexible hours that could accommodate hospital visits and late-night emergencies. Ethel Guards was hiring. The pay was decent, the hours were she needed. She had filled out the application, and under previous experience, she had simply written restaurant management. No one had bothered to ask for details. They saw what they wanted to see, a capable, presentable woman willing to wait tables. They did not see the Michelin-starred restaurateur, the graduate of Lausanne, the protégé of a service legend. They saw a waitress, just as Mr. Sterling did. He thought he was challenging a simple waitress. He had no idea he had just challenged a lioness, a master of the very domain he sought to mock. Amara took a deep breath, the memories settling within her not as a weight, but as armor. She was not just doing this for the $10,000 for the staff fund. She was not just doing this to humiliate a bully. She was doing this for Monsieur Dubois, for the sanctity of her craft, for the mother who taught her that dignity was something you owned, not something others could take away. She pushed open the door to the alcove and walked back into the dining room. Her posture had changed. It was subtle, but every person in the room felt it. Before, she had moved with quiet efficiency. Now, she moved with an almost regal bearing. Her shoulders were back, her chin was lifted, her steps were infused with a dancer's poise. She was no longer Amara the waitress. She was Amara Dubois, and she was about to begin her performance. She approached table 7, a small leather-bound notepad and a silver pen in her hand. She stopped beside Mr. Sterling and inclined her head slightly. "Messrs," she began, and the word that came from her lips was a revelation. It was not the clumsy, anglicized French of a high school student. It was the fluid, melodious French of a native Parisian. The accent was perfect, the intonation flawless. "Pardonnez mon audace, mais nous allons recommencer. Je suis Amara, et j'aurai le privilège de vous servir ce soir. Puis-je vous présenter nos spécialités? Gentlemen, forgive my boldness, but we will begin again. I am Amara, and I will have the privilege of serving you this evening. May I present our specials?" Mr. Sterling stared, his smug grin frozen on his face. The French was too fast, too perfect. He had caught the word privilege, and the irony was not lost on him. His friends exchanged nervous glances. This was not going as planned. The sun, however, looked up at Amara with a glimmer of hope and astonishment. Amara did not wait for a response. She launched into a description of the evening's specials, but she did not simply list them. She painted pictures with her words. She spoke of the pan-seared scallops, not as food, but as joyaux de la mer, jewels of the sea, harvested that very morning from the cold waters off the coast of Maine. She described how the chef would sear them to achieve a perfect Maillard crust while keeping the inside tender and almost translucent, comme un baiser de l'ocean, like a kiss from the ocean. She moved on to the rack of lamb, explaining its provenance from a small, family-owned farm in Colorado. She spoke of the persillade, the delicate crust of parsley, garlic, and breadcrumbs that would seal in the juices. She described the sauce, justinho, a reduction of the lamb's own roasting juices, simmered for hours with thyme and a whisper of lavender. The entire dining room was wrapped. People were not just listening, they were captivated. The descriptions were so vivid, so passionate, that the entire room could almost taste the food. Mr. Sterling's face had lost its color. The confident bully had vanished, replaced by a pale, sweating man who was beginning to understand the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. He understood none of the specific words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of absolute, unassailable expertise. Amara finished her descriptions and turned to the youngest man at the table, Sterling's son. "Et pour le jeune homme, she esqued oui à gentle smile." And for the young man, he looked at his father, then back at Amara, his eyes wide with admiration. "I Cologno," he stammered, trying to match her language. "The lamb." "Excellent choix, monsieur," Amara replied smoothly, making a note. "An excellent choice, sir." She then turned to the other two men, whose earlier snickers had been replaced by a cowed silence. They mumbled their orders in English, pointing at the menu, and she translated them into her flawless French notes without a flicker of condescension. Finally, she turned to Mr. Sterling. "Et pour vous, monsieur?" His moment had arrived. The spotlight was on him. He was supposed to order to continue the charade. But the French words he knew, the few phrases he'd picked up on a vacation in Nice, felt like pebbles against the mountain of her fluency. He swallowed hard. The steak," he grumbled in English, his voice a pathetic shadow of its earlier boom. "Le filet de boeuf," she corrected gently, though the correction felt like a slap. "Et la cuisson." "The filet of beef. And how would you like it cooked?" "Medium rare," he muttered, defeated. "A point," she noted. "Très bien, medium rare." Very good. The first part of the challenge was complete. Now for the wine. "Pour accompagners des plats," she began, her voice taking on a new, scholarly tone. "Je me permettrais de sugar, To accompany these dishes, I would permit myself to suggest. What followed was not a simple recommendation. It was a masterclass in oenology. She dismissed the idea of a single bottle for the table. Les saveurs sont trop distinctes, she explained. The flavors are too distinct. For the lamb and the beef, she recommended a 2015 Bordeaux from Pauillac. But she didn't just name it. She spoke of the chateau, its history stretching back to the 18th century. She described the terroir, the gravelly soil that forced the Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot grapes to struggle, producing a wine of incredible depth and complexity. She spoke of its notes of cassis, cedar, and a hint of tobacco, which would chanter avec la richesse de la viande, sing with the richness of the meat. For the scallops, she suggested a Sancerre from the Loire Valley, but not just any Sancerre. A specific single vineyard bottling. She described its crisp minerality, its notes of grapefruit and flint, which would cut through the richness of the butter sauce, and Reveilleur le Palais, awaken the palate. The restaurant's sommelier stood by the service station, his mouth slightly agape, listening with the reverence of a student at the feet of a master. The other diners were mesmerized. The mockery that had filled the room 30 minutes prior had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, profound respect. A low murmur of admiration rippled through the tables. Amara concluded her presentation. Ces sélections vous conviennent-elles, messieurs? Do these selections suit you, gentlemen? Sterling could only manage a weak, jerky nod. He was a man drowning. The panic was no longer a subtle tremor. It was a visible storm on his face. The sweat now beaded on his forehead and upper lip. His expensive suit felt like a straitjacket. He tugged at his collar, his eyes darting around the room, seeing not admiration for his wealth, but universal scorn for his folly. He had wanted to be the center of attention, and now he was. But as a fool, as the villain in a story that was unfolding, to his horror, with him as the punchline. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was over. He had not just lost a stupid bet. He had publicly, spectacularly, immolated his own ego. As Amara turned to retrieve the wine, the restaurant manager, a man named Mr. Harrison, hurried from his office. He had been alerted by the sommelier, and for the last 10 minutes, he had been frantically typing on his computer, his heart pounding. He had pulled up Amara's employment file, seen the simple restaurant management line, and, driven by a desperate hunch, had started searching her name online. What he found had made him go cold. He now approached table 7, his face a mixture of awe and profound apology. He stopped beside a still trembling Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly but carrying the weight of authority. Sterling looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Perhaps the manager was coming to his rescue, to put a stop to this. That hope died instantly. I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding, Harrison continued, his voice resonating in the silent room. He turned his gaze to Amara, who had paused nearby, holding 2 bottles of wine with the casual ease of a seasoned professional. Mr. Sterling, I don't believe you are aware of who you are speaking to. Harrison took a deep breath. This is not just Amara, our waitress. This is Mademoiselle Amara Dubois. The use of Mademoiselle was a deliberate mark of respect. She is a first-class honors graduate of the École Hôtelière de Lausanne in Switzerland. She is also the former co-owner and front-of-house manager of Lucille Argent in Paris. He let the name of the restaurant hang in the air. A Michelin-starred establishment. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to be fluent in French. It was another thing entirely to be a decorated world-class figure in the very industry you were pretending to be a novice in. The humiliation was now absolute. Sterling had not just picked a fight with a waitress. He had challenged a grandmaster to a game of checkers. But the hammer had not yet finished falling. From across the table, Sterling's son, David, slowly raised his phone. The screen was on, the red dot of the recording timer blinking steadily in the corner. I got it all, Dad, David said, his voice quiet but firm, laced with a disgust that was more damning than any shout. From the moment you snapped your fingers at her, the $1,000 offer, the mockery, her counteroffer, everything. Sterling's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of gray. As if on cue, a man at a nearby table stood up. He was distinguished, with silver hair and a sharp suit. Many in the room recognized him. He was Julian Croft, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the city's largest newspaper. "I have a recording as well, Mr. Sterling," Croft said, his voice calm and journalistic. "I find that unprovoked acts of cruelty toward working people make for very compelling human interest stories. My readers are particularly fond of them." The trap was not just sprung, its steel jaws had snapped shut. Sterling was surrounded. There was no escape. The evidence was digital, witnessed, and about to become front-page news. Amara stepped forward, placing the 2 bottles of wine on a nearby service stand. She looked at Sterling, not with triumph, but with a quiet, solemn finality. "The terms of our agreement, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice reverting to clear, crisp English. $10,000 for the employee fund, and a public apology. The manager, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat. "And, Mr. Sterling, I am afraid I must add a consequence of our own. Your membership privileges at Ethelgard and all affiliated clubs are hereby and permanently revoked. Your behavior is fundamentally incompatible with the values of this establishment." This was the final blow to his status. He was being cast out, publicly. Sterling, cornered and broken, made one last, pathetic attempt to wield the power he no longer possessed. He struggled to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of rage and desperation. "Do you know who I am?" he sputtered, the words that had always been his shield and his sword now sounding hollow and pathetic. "I'm Arthur Sterling. I will buy this pathetic restaurant. I will fire every last one of you. You will all be ruined." No one flinched. No one was afraid. His threats were the desperate roars of a dethroned king. Amara simply looked at him with something that bordered on pity. "You can't buy dignity, Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "and you have just bankrupted your own." Before Sterling could utter another empty threat, 2 large men in dark suits, the club's head of security, materialized at his side. They had been summoned by Harrison minutes before. Their presence was quiet, but their purpose was unmistakable. "Mr. Sterling," one of them said in a low, firm voice, "it's time to leave." Sterling looked from the security guards to the faces of the other diners. He saw no sympathy. He saw only cold, hard judgment. He looked at his friends, who were staring intently at their plates, refusing to meet his gaze. He looked at his son, who simply shook his head in disappointment. Defeated, he sagged. The fight went out of him, replaced by a shambling, pathetic compliance. He was escorted from the table, past the silent onlookers. His public shaming was complete. As he was led through the grand doors of Ethelgard's and out into the night, a strange thing happened. Someone began to clap. It started at one table, then spread to another and another, until the entire dining room, staff and patrons alike, erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It was not for Sterling's departure. It was for Amara. She stood in the center of the room, a lone figure in a simple black uniform, and she accepted the ovation not with a triumphant smile, but with a simple, graceful nod of her head. Her eyes found Sterling's son, David, who remained at the table. He stood up and approached her, his face etched with shame. "Miss Du Bois," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. There is no excuse for my father's behavior. None." He pulled out a checkbook, the $10,000 for the staff fund, and the apology he failed to give on behalf of my family. "I am deeply, deeply sorry for the humiliation you were put through." Amara looked at the young man and saw not the arrogance of the father, but a genuine decency. "Your apology is accepted, David," she said kindly. "It takes a strong character to stand up to your own family. Do not let his bitterness define you." She then turned to the staff, who were watching her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "No one," she said, her voice clear and strong, "should ever have to endure what happened here tonight. Your work has dignity. You have dignity. Never let anyone, no matter how wealthy or powerful, convince you otherwise. Respect is not a privilege to be earned. It is a right to be demanded." It was a victory speech, short, powerful, and from the heart. In that moment, she was not their co-worker. She was their leader. 6 months later, the name Arthur Sterling was now a punchline in the city's financial circles, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. The story, published by Julian Croft, had gone viral. The Waitress and the Millionaire became a national sensation. The recording from his son's phone was leaked, and the world heard Sterling's sneering arrogance and Amara's calm, devastating response. The board of directors of Sterling's corporation, Sterling Holdings, convened an emergency meeting. Faced with plummeting stock prices and a public relations nightmare, they invoked the moral turpitude clause in his contract. Arthur Sterling was unceremoniously fired from the company he had built. His wife, a woman who had tolerated his boorishness as long as it was accompanied by immense wealth and status, saw the writing on the wall. She filed for divorce, and her team of ruthless lawyers ensured she walked away with the lion's share of their liquid assets and properties. His friends, the two sycophants from that night, vanished. They no longer answered his calls. In the world they inhabited, association with public failure was a contagious disease. Stripped of his company, his wife, his fortune, and his social standing, Arthur Sterling was adrift. He was forced to sell his mansion, his cars, his art collection. The last anyone heard, he was seen working as a parking attendant at a mid-range airport hotel. He wore an ill-fitting polyester uniform and spent his days taking keys from travelers who didn't give him a second glance. He, who had once commanded boardrooms, now took orders from tourists. He, who had once snapped his fingers for service, now subsisted on tips. He had become invisible. A fate he had once tried to force upon others was now his own bitter reality. His punishment was not just financial, it was poetic. It was absolute. For Amara Dubois, those same 6 months had been a whirlwind of transformation. The owner of Ethelgard, a wealthy but decent man who was horrified to learn of the incident and Amara's true background, had immediately offered her the position of general manager. Amara accepted, but on her own terms. She instituted sweeping changes. The staff received higher wages and better benefits. She established a zero-tolerance policy for disrespectful behavior from guests, a policy that was printed elegantly at the bottom of every menu. Our staff serves with dignity. We insist they are treated with the same. She used her Michelin star expertise to refine every aspect of the restaurant, from the service protocols to the menu design. Ethelgard, already a top restaurant, ascended to a new level of excellence. It became known not just for its food, but for its culture of respect. Her story inspired an outpouring of support. David Sterling, true to his word, became a key benefactor. Together, he and Amara established the Dubois Dignity Foundation. Fueled by donations from a public captivated by her story, the foundation provided full scholarships for underprivileged students with a passion for service to attend the world's best hospitality schools, including Amara's own alma mater, Lausanne. She was no longer just a restaurant manager. She was a symbol of grace under pressure, of the quiet power of excellence. She was invited to speak at industry conferences and business schools, her speeches focusing on her core belief that the true measure of a society is how it treats those who serve. Her mother's health, thanks to the best care money could now easily afford, had stabilized. She was in remission, her prognosis bright. Amara had her family back, her career back, and a new, profound sense of purpose. One evening, standing in the bustling dining room of the new Ethelgard, she watched her staff move with a newfound pride and confidence. She saw a young scholarship recipient from her foundation, now an intern, explaining the wine list to a table of impressed guests. In that moment, she understood the true nature of what had happened that night 6 months ago. The world is full of people like Arthur Sterling, men and women who build their castles on foundations of arrogance and prejudice. They confuse their net worth with their self-worth, and they believe their power gives them the right to diminish others. But true power, the story of Amara Dubois proved, resides elsewhere. It resides in skill honed through discipline. It resides in character forged in adversity. It resides in the quiet, unshakable dignity that no amount of money can buy and no amount of mockery can break. The ultimate lesson, whispered in the hallowed halls of Ethelgard and carried out into the world by her example, was simple and eternal. Never, ever underestimate the person pouring your water. You have no idea the worlds they contain.